let's move on to the next set of fallacies, the fallacy of relevance. So when you say fallacy of relevance, it's not based on some confusion of words or content or meaning. The meaning, the words used, the expression used, the language are clear. But the problem is there's a tendency to obscure the issue, meaning the subject matter, and present premises that are not logically relevant to the issue under discussion. That's why it's called fallacy of relevance, or sometimes they call it should be called fallacy of irrelevance. No, but we're talking of the relevance of a particular premise or proof or reason or evidence to the argument or to the claim or to the conclusion. So you can give a reason, but sometimes the question is that reason relevant to the issue? Because if not, then it's fallacious. So the arguer may present information that does not prove the claim or the conclusion being made. So it's totally out. You see? Totally, it may be not connected. It may not be related to the issue. So, fallacy of relevance fails to provide adequate reason for believing the truth of a conclusion or claim, and they're often used in attempts to persuade people by non-logical means. So you do some other means in order to convince people. Okay, may resort to threatening them or resort to appeal for mercy. Okay, or you may attack the person. So it's a question of whether the argument you present or the reasons you present is relevant to the conclusion or relevant to the arguments. Okay, so the first is ignoring the issue. Here, one does not prove or disprove the point at issue. You, sort of, you sidestep, you ignore, okay, the main issue by maybe appealing to our emotions. Okay, so if you're asked, for example, is your boyfriend handsome? Then you answer, well, he is kind. The issue is whether your boyfriend is handsome, not if he is kind. You're ignoring the issue. That's one way of ignoring the issue. We change the topic, right? So there are many forms of ignoring the issue. I'm going to give you the Latin, but of course we have the translation there. Ad populum, ad baculum, ad pericondiam, ad misericordiam, ad ignorantiam, ad hominem, invalid extension, and diversion. Okay, so these are ignoring the issue. So we're going to discuss this one by one. Okay, and you're going to see that these fallacies are very common. They're very popular. Many people use them. Only that if we are not familiar with them, we thought they're okay, but of course they are not. So the first one is argumentum ad populum, meaning you appeal to the people. You appeal to the prejudices of the people, to the passion of the people. Oh? So, Banwagon, for example, is an argumentum ad populum. So, populum appeals to the prejudices or biases or passions of the people. Sometimes you call this appeal to the gallery or appeal to the audience. Okay? So, normally in a debate, some debaters may employ this. You see, when they give a statement, they're going to give statements that are popular to the people. Okay? We have a very good example. Our government today oftentimes use this argument to steer the bias, the prejudices of the people, the passion. So they will issue statements that are popular to the people, and then the audience, the people will, yay, very good. But problem is, they're not giving valid reasons. They are just giving statements that are popular to the people. For example, the prosecutor at a trial for murder expounds on how terrible murder is instead of proving that the accused is guilty. What is the main point? The main point is whether the accused is guilty or not. But if the prosecutor will talk about how terrible murder is, of course, people will say, well, yes, we should, we should imprison all murderers. People will like that. Okay, we should get rid of all these drug addicts. But the main issue here is whether the accused is guilty or not. By giving these statements that are popular to the people, you miss the point. You are arguing ad populum. Okay, and this is a very classic example of populum. Okay, so this politician said, "My countrymen, there's been some talk that the government is overstepping its bounds by allowing police to enter people's homes without the warrants traditionally required by the Constitution. However, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times require appropriate actions. I have in my office thousands of letters from people who let me know, in no uncertain terms, that they certainly want to feel safe in their homes against lawless elements. Because of this overwhelming approval, it is evident that the police are doing the right thing. Why is this popular? Because the main issue here is whether we have to, enter people's homes without warrant. That's the main issue. Okay? But if you're going to say about thousands of letters, people, they're against lawless elements, etc., etc., they're just giving statements that appeal to the sentiment of the people instead of proving whether warrantless arrest or warrantless search is valid or not. That's the main issue. But obviously, some people will just resort to, popular statements. Okay? And we are very familiar with some politicians, even government people, doing this. Okay? Next, argumentum ad baculum. So here, we appeal to power or appeal to might. So, it could be an appeal to physical force or moral pressure or using intimidation or coercion or threat of dire consequences. Okay? So, baculum, actually, the word baculum is a staff. It's a symbol of, it's a symbol of power or might. The staff, the stick. Okay? So, that's where you get the word appeal to power or ad baculum. So, example here, if your country does not sign this agreement, you better prepare your military for war, for we will see to it that you get our message clear. Obviously, it's a threat. So instead of giving reason, what does this person do? He threatens. Okay, he threatens the other party into signing the agreement. Okay, so of course, it's very common. No, it's very common for people to, when they want to have want their argument, your position to be, to be accepted, they just give argumentum ad baculum. See? Waswasan kita dyan. Oh, that's baculum. Appeal to power. Okay? And in our present, situation today, there are so many ad baculum. Okay? So see, another example here. I'm sure you can support the proposal to diversify into the fast food industry. Because if I receive any opposition on this initiative, I will personally see that you are transferred to the janitorial division of this corporation. Hmm, that's baculum. And in the Philippines, during election, there are so many ad baculum argument. If you're not going to vote for me, you better look for another job or better look for another place because that piece of land, okay, or that area where your house hmm, is, constructed, that's our land. Baculum, okay, baculum. So there's so many baculum. I mean, it's some common. And mind you, even the church for some time hmm, have also used argumentum ad baculum, especially in this case in the 16th century, the case of Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno is one of the philosophical philosophers and scientists at the time, and he followed the hypothesis of Copernicus. Okay? So Giordano Bruno envisioned a multitude of solar systems in limitless space and believed in the astronomical hypothesis of Copernicus. The church told Bruno to change his views. Otherwise, if he will not change his views, he will suffer. Obviously, Bruno did not change his view. And because he did not change his view, he was burned at stake in 1600. See? So that's that's baculum, okay? Intimidation. Here, another example. On October 10, 1971, Secretary of State William Rogers, obviously the U.S., cautioned foreign ministers that Congress might force the United States to reduce its financial contributions to the United Nations if nationalist China is expelled Taiwan. As a logical argument, Rogers' caution is fallacious. As a political maneuver, no argument is being adduced. See, if you're going to expel Taiwan, then we are going to reduce our financial contribution to the United Nations. That's baculum. Okay. Now, ad baculum is not fallacious when the appeal to force or consequence is not directly relevant to the conclusion. Example here. Greenpeace argued that the large underground nuclear test in Amchitka Island of Alaska in the early 70s had the possible results of earthquake, tsunamis, and radiations, and therefore these environmentalists opposed testing. That is not baculum because that is really a consequence. It's not a threat. Okay? It's not a threat, for example, if a teacher would tell his or her student, you better study. Because if you don't study, you might fail. Now, that is not baculum because that's a natural consequence. Okay? So it's not just, it's related to the issue. Failing is related to not studying. So it's not baculum. Okay? So the threat here is logically connected with the argument because of the probability of these consequences is not decisional or prescriptive, but causal. Meaning there is a direct connection between this and that, and therefore no fallacy occurs. Okay? I hope that's clear. All right. Next is argumentum ad vericondia, appeal to authority. So some people, they may not be able to convince other people by resorting to the populum, or sometimes they cannot be successful in intimidating other people. What do they do? Well, they appeal to authority. Somebody said this, all right? So they try to convince or persuade other people by pointing out the dignity, the authority, the qualification of a person who adhere to a certain view, although it is something outside their expertise. So there's nothing wrong with quoting somebody who is an expert in a particular field, or an expert or authority in a particular subject matter. Baculum is committed when we point out the expertise of a person or the authority of a person outside his or her own field of expertise. That's pericondium. So if you're talking, for example, about scientific matters, and we cite the view of a prominent scientist who is an expert in this particular issue, we are not committing argumentum ad pericondiam. But suppose our topic is about religious matter, and you cite the authority of a mathematician who has not worked on any religious matter or issue, then we commit the fallacy of pericondiam. Okay? So normally, we just drop names, but the names that we drop may not be experts on the issue. So many advertising campaigns are built on this fallacy. They use, for example, popular sports figures, musicians, even actors to endorse their products. And this fact is offered as a reason to use a particular product. But sometimes these figures are just trying to convince people they are not really experts about the use of this particular product. So it's pericondium. Okay? So there are several forms of pericondium. Appeal to the authority of the one. You cite one person, like for example, when you say, the brilliant William Jenkins, the recent Nobel Prize winner in physics, states categorically that the flu virus will be controlled in essentially all of its forms by the year 2050. Of course, this is just an example. The opinion of such a great man cannot be disregarded. Now, come to think of it, Jenkins is really a Nobel Prize winner. In what field? Physics. And what are we talking about? About flu virus. Unless Jenkins is also, a scientist, a biologist or something, then the use of Jenkins here is an example of pericondium. Appeal to the authority of the many. You say 5 senators, 10 representatives, not to mention the different cause-oriented groups who tell us that the war in the South is an unjust and useless one. So you mentioned all these many. Okay, we have to believe that these people are saying it is just impossible that this number of people could be mistaken. We're appealing to the authority of the many. Okay, you have to support whether these many are experts about this particular issue. If they're not, that's pericondium. Or you can appeal to tradition. Our forefathers have said that we have descended from the great Malayan race, and such thought have been passed on to us for many years. Could our forefathers be mistaken? Well, yes, they could be mistaken. Okay? Or appeal to the select few. You know, the elect members of this chamber, the cream of the crop, these few learned men tell us that we have to repeal this law, for it is unjust. Should we argue against them? Well, yes, you should argue against them, especially if they are not really experts about this particular law. Okay? So it's not just about citing or mentioning other people, because if you don't, provide an argument that would support your claim that these people are really experts in that particular field, then you commit the fallacy of Pericondia. Okay? Now, this is an example, because sometimes we always say that, well, we always have to cite other people, right? And it will depend on the expertise of the people that we cite. So will this be an ad Pericondia? So this is from Galileo. But can you doubt that air has weight? When you have the clear testimony of Aristotle, affirming that all the elements have weight, including air, and accepting only fire. It's Galileo citing Aristotle about air. And some people would regard this as a kind of Pericondium because they thought Aristotle is just a philosopher. But Aristotle is not just a philosopher. He was also a scientist. So the point here is, when we cite people, we have to cite those people who are experts in the field or on the matter that we are discussing about. Otherwise, if we just drop the names of people, but they are not expert on the particular issue we're talking about, then that's a clear Pericondium. Okay, that's a clear Pericondium. So, yes, we need to cite experts, but we have to make sure that the experts that we quote, okay, should be experts in that particular, in the issue or the subject matter under discussion. Next is Argumentum ad misericordia, appeal to pity. So some people, they cannot convince other people by threatening them, by citing, experts who are not really expert in the field under discussion, or they cannot convince using populum. What do? They resort to pity, mercy, compassion, to argumentum ad misericordiam, appeal to pity. So it appeals to our intrinsic or to instinct to have compassion on the unfortunate. So in misericordiam, we set aside reason and we plead for mercy or compassion. Misericordiam. So instead of proving the innocence of an accused person, a lawyer portrayed the unfortunate life of the accused, and the more unfortunate life his family will live without him. So the lawyer, in proving the innocence of his client, may address the jury or the judge and say, Your Honor, if you convict this man, think about his family. Who will take care of them? Your Honor, he has 6 children. They're all very young. And his wife is just a simple helper. If you convict this man, who do you think will take care of these poor little children? Well, that's a good appeal. But the issue here is whether the accused is guilty or not. So misericordiam will work in some other ways, probably in convincing other people. But as a matter of logic, that would be fallacious. Okay? Because we are not arguing based on reason, but based on emotion. So, another example. A student was asking her teacher to pass her in a particular subject because if she fails, she will not be sent to school by her parents anymore, and that her mother might harm her. It's misericordia. Okay? Of course, misericordium will have some effects in the way we argue, but as far as reason or logic is concerned, that's not the case. Because when in courts, especially in a jury trial, misericordium may work. It may actually convince people by appealing for mercy. Like some students, appealing for mercy from their teachers who pass them because uh, their future is at stake. See? So I remember in the case of Imelda Marcos when she was tried in New York after the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos died. She would appear in court dressed in black because she was mourning then, holding a handkerchief in one hand and the rosary in the other hand. And then during the proceedings, she will broke into tears, full view of the jury. Obviously, it was an appeal for compassion, misericordiam to the jury. And probably it helped because she was, she was uh, uh, absorbed, okay? Meaning the verdict was not guilty. The jury verdict was not guilty. So maybe, but it was obviously an argumentum ad misericordiam. Okay. So here, another example of misericordia. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, has been misunderstood almost all his life. Wow, that's a great appeal. Since World War II, he came close twice to having a mental breakdown. First with the death of his wife, and second with the explosion of the atomic bomb. I think that the Journal of Science should publish some of his later theoretical work out of our kind regard for his memory and from the interest of the human concern for his difficult life. Well, Feynman may deserve, no, that his works be published, but arguing based on his misfortune, no, is certainly an example of misericordia. Now, argumentum ad ignorantiam, appeal to ignorance. So what do we do in ignorantiam? We rely on the lack of knowledge of the hearers or of the audience to hinder them from seeing through the irrelevance or maybe emptiness of one's argument. So we capitalize, we take advantage of their lack of knowledge, of their ignorance. So the use of fire words, for example, high-sounding words, the use of grand eloquence of the grand eloquence of a language, in order to sway our audience to be convinced, simply because they don't understand what we are talking about. And normally people, they don't want to be exposed as being ignorant. So if you use certain words that they cannot understand, if you quote books that they have not read, and they would pretend that they know what you're talking about, most likely you will be able to convince them. Because you capitalize, you take advantage of their ignorance. So we argue from a lack of evidence of a certain claim. A proposition is simply taken to be true on the basis that it's not been proved to be false, and that it is false simply because it's not been proved to be true. So that's clear case of ignorance. So here are some examples. Marie said, there are angels around us. And Paul said, there are no angels. No one has proven that there are angels around us, not even physics. So since Marie is ignorant of some proofs about angels, then Paul said, your argument is wrong. So if there were really no large and unusual type of animals in the marshland, then we would have undeniable evidence of it by now. But we don't have undeniable evidence of a large and familiar animal in the marshland. Therefore, there is no such animal. So you are people are ignorant of proof, and because there are no proof, then that's not a good argument. Okay? So people, you can use, like for example, if you are presenting, you may use high-sounding words. You can speak in English, and if the other party cannot understand, since he's quiet, and you keep on talking in English, and so you think you have won the argument, but you are just capitalizing on his lack of command of the language that you use. So you can use some data, some statistics in order to convince people. You may present very good PowerPoint presentations, and people, your audience, may just be in awe of your presentation, and they cannot understand your presentation. So they will just, say yes to you. But obviously, it's just, an appeal to their ignorance. Now, the next is argumentum ad hominem, appeal to the individual. So here, this is, I think, the worst kind of argument, because here, instead of attacking the argument, you attack the person or the character or circumstances of the proponent of an argument. Ad hominem, personal attack. So the first type under this is abusive. It attacks the very person himself. The other is circumstantial. It implies or insinuates vested interest on the part of the opponent. And the other one is from hypocrisy. So we're going to give examples of this. First is abusive. This is an example of an abusive ad hominem. The senator says that we should spend more state revenue on education because doing so would result in a more productive workforce. But the senator, but that senator, meaning the senator who said, is a corrupt liberal who did not finish college. It's a personal attack. So you know that his opinion is worthless. That's a personal attack. Okay? Your argument is wrong. Why? Well, look at you. You did not even finish college. You are just this and that. That's abusive. Because instead of arguing against the position of the person, you attack the person. Okay? So some mudslinging, name calling. What? I remember Marcos during the election, he was pitted against Cora Aquino, and he said, women? Well, we should love women. But women in politics, they're only good in the bedroom. No, that's an obvious ad hominem. And today, in our government, in our society, there's so much ad hominem when people speak. When government people speak, there's so much ad hominem. So, attack on women, attack on other people, the poor, etc. There are just so many ad hominem. Abusive type. So another example here. I believe that abortion is morally wrong. And Dan said, of course you would say that. You're a priest. And Tom said, what about the arguments I gave to support my position? And Dan said, they don't count. Like I said, you're a priest. So you have to say that abortion is wrong. And you are just a mouthpiece of the Pope. Oh my God. Just a mouthpiece of the Pope. So it's an obvious ad hominem. Okay. Here, when a teacher was expounding on the topic of morality, a student retorted, how can she speak of morality when we hear of so many rumors about her relationship with another married man? That's personal attack. See here, this theory about a potential cure for cancer has been introduced by a doctor who is known lesbian feminist. Oh, that's name calling. Again, that's profiling. Okay. I don't see why we should extend an invitation to her to speak at the World Conference on Cancer. That's abusive. Now, what about circumstantial here? Of course, you are not attacking the person directly, but you are, insinuating something. Like, for example, of course, the council is opposed to rent control. Did we hear that he owns 2 building apartments? That's circumstantial. How come she owns these luxury properties when she is only an ordinary employee at the city hall? I smell something fishy. Well, this is not a direct charge of corruption, but you are insinuating something. Okay? So we need to be more selective in choosing our candidates, especially the celebrities. We know they are charming, but charm is not intelligence. That is circumstantial. But just the same, it is ad hominem. Okay? Here are some examples. I think we should reject what Father Jones has to say about the ethical issues of abortion because he is a Catholic priest. After all, Father Jones is required to hold such views. So these are just circumstantial. Okay. So these are, of course, other examples are circumstantial. Now let's go to the tu koke. Tu koke means you also. Tu koke, you also. So try to pass back the argument against your opponent. For example, you say, you claim that smoking is bad, but you smoke too. You also smoke. So that's tu koke. Okay? You said it's good to live in the rural areas. How come you are living in the city? Okay? So here, Mr. Cruz said to Professor Santos, you are much too hard on your students. And Professor Santos replies, but certainly you are not the one to say so. Just last week, I heard several of your students complaining. People complain against you. So that's tu koke. Okay. All right. So these are just examples of tu koke. Okay. One student, when he received the grades, and her parents, or her mother, saw the grades. Her mother told the daughter, your grades are not very good. And the daughter said, Mom, why? Are Lolo and Lola proud of your grades when you were studying? Oh, that's tu koke. Okay, that's personal. That's personal. All right. Now, some other examples, some other fallacies in valid extension. It is when we widen the question unduly by giving it a more extended interpretation or application than the moderate claim intended. So you try to extend. You are putting, sometimes you put words into the mouth to extend the claim. Okay? So, see here. Those who support gun control are wrong. They believe that no one should have the right to defend himself in any situation. Oh, wait a minute. The claim here is about gun control. He is not saying that we should not have the right to defend ourselves. This is extending the argument. The argument is only about gun control, not about the right to defend oneself in any situation. Okay? Here, another example. The gentleman from the north proposes that we privatize some basic utilities like water. So the issue is about privatizing basic utilities. But what he wants for us is to sell all government-owned corporations to the private sector. Oh, wait a minute. That's not part of the argument. He's not saying that we have to sell all government assets or owned corporations. It's just talking about basic utilities. So that's invalid extension. Okay. Now, diversion, which is also very common, when you sidestep the original question, the topic, and substitute different questions or topic in its place. Pedro said, is your girlfriend beautiful? One said, well, she's smart. That's diversion. The issue is about beauty, not being smart. Mother, how come your test scores are all failing? Son said, test scores? Well, our teacher said next exam will be next week, so I will just focus on that exam. The issue is about this exam, not in the next exam. That's diversion. Okay. Now, begging the question or petition principii, you commit this when the very conclusion of problem to be proved is assumed to be true. So we use a premise that cannot be known to be true unless the conclusion is first known to be true. So let me just give you some examples here. So there are three types here: equivalent term, wider principle, vicious circle. So here are some examples. Using equivalent term. Miracles are impossible. Why? Because they cannot happen. That's the same. Impossible cannot happen. Okay? He had a heart failure. Why? Because he had a cardiac arrest. Oh, heart failure and cardiac arrest are just the same. You beg the question. The belief in God is universal. After all, everyone believes in God. Of course. Being universal means it's for everybody. Okay? So it becomes a circular argument. Why the principle? So here, for example, the world is not eternal because matter is not eternal. So matter is not eternal is a wider principle than your conclusion of the world not being eternal. So you are just, the question, the point is just begging the question. You are not offering an independent proof. He's an atheist because he's a philosopher. That's not an argument. Okay, and then the vicious circle. So what is the vicious circle? It's like this. It says in the Bible that God exists. Since the Bible is God's word and God never speaks falsely, then everything in the Bible must be true. So God must exist. So it becomes a vicious circle. I'm going to pass this subject. Why? Well, because I'm going to pass the final exam. Why are you going to pass the final exam? Precisely because I'm going to pass this subject. It's a vicious circle. We're going to win. Why? Because we are the best team in the conference. Why are you the best team? Well, because we are going to win the championship. That's a vicious circle. And this is an obvious vicious circle. The manager said, how does our company know that you're honest and reliable, Mr. Cruz? And Mr. Cruz said, well, I think my friend, Mr. Cortez, will give me a good reference. And the manager said, well, how can we trust the words of Mr. Cortez? And the manager said, and Mr. Cruz said, of course you can. I vouch for the words of Mr. Cortez. But that's precisely the point. How can your words be proven to be reliable? That's a vicious circle. And then fallacy of false cause. You assign a wrong cause to a certain effect. Normally, we make a link between two events when there's no such connection. Sometimes you call this non sequitur. It does not follow. So here are some examples of false cause. Post hoc, coincidence, oversimplifying the cause. Right? Oh, I have only 9 minutes. So let's make this faster. So the first one is post hoc. Now, the post hoc is, we think that simply because one thing happened first, and therefore because it is the first thing to happen, then it is the cause of the next. Okay? So succession or successive events does not mean that there's a causal connection between two. It's just so happen that they happen successively. Okay? So there are many bases for superstition, erroneous belief. Okay? So for example, let's have an example here. Night comes before day, therefore night is the cause of day. There's no causal link between the two. Succession. Okay? I got healed when I took a certain medicine. Therefore, I got healed because I took the medicine. Unless the medicine is really a medicine for your sickness. But if you argue that simply because you take this particular medicine and right after taking the medicine you get healed, that's post hoc. Okay? So when I whistle, the wind blows. You know, in the provinces, in the rural areas, when you whistle, the wind blows. So it must be my whistle that makes the wind blows. Well, there's no relationship. There's no causal connection. No? If you see a black cat, that will be a sign of bad luck. Then you saw a cat, a black cat, and then you trip over. So is the black cat the cause of your tripping over? That's false cause. And then arguing from coincidence. My teacher might give a very simple examination, so I'm not going to study so hard, because last time the exam was easy, so this time maybe the teacher will not give a different exam. When I use my lucky pen before, I pass the test. Therefore, I'll fail if I don't use that pen. Superstitious belief, right? If I'm going to wear this pair of socks in my next game, we're going to win because I wore these socks during the previous games and we won. So this is my lucky charm. I'm going to use this sock. I will not wash this sock. Okay, I will wear it until the end of the tournament because it's my lucky charm. That's false cause. Oversimplifying the cause. You provide a very simple, naive explanation, the cause of a complex event, which is actually caused by several causes, not just one. So our society is filled with violence. There's a lot of violence on TV. It is obvious that the violence in society is caused by people watching television. Well, watching violent shows could be one of the causes of violence, but not the only cause. You have oversimplified the cause of violence. The hostage taking ended in tragedy because of the extensive media coverage of the crisis. Well, it could be one, but that's not the only cause why the hostage taking ended in tragedy. Okay? Slippery slope. Now, this is very common. When you believe that one thing leads to another, then leads to another, then leads to another without giving valid reasons. So, for example, here, legalizing marijuana will lead to the legalization of cocaine. If cocaine is legalized, then anyone can buy any kind of drug at any local convenience store. That's slippery slope. Okay? Here, our country should not get involved militarily in other countries. Once the government sends in few troops, it will send in hundreds, then thousands, and then many Filipino troops will die. That's slippery slope. If the teacher will not deliver the lesson well, we're going to fail. And if we fail, we're not going to finish our degree. And if we don't get our degree, we will not be promoted. And if we will not be promoted, our life will be miserable. So you see, if the professor will not give the proper lesson, our life will be miserable. That's false cause, slippery slope. Okay? So, then you have weak analogy. So I'm just finishing this. I have 4 minutes. Weak comparison between two things. You compare something when in fact there's not enough basis for comparison. So for example, you say Japan and the US belong to the first world countries and they have both strong economies. Then they must have the same economic policies. That's weak analogy. It does not mean that simply because they both belong to the first world countries and they have strong economies and therefore they have the same economic policies. You are comparing two things without very sound basis for comparison. Then red herring is some kind of a diversionary tactic. We divert listeners' attention by changing, our subject or drawing slightly different conclusion than the one that should be drawn. Sometimes it's also called raw straw man's argument. What is a straw? Straw it's a very loose thing, really loose object. It's a straw. So you divert the attention of other people. Sometimes you call it squid tactic. Okay, the squid tactic. Here, The death penalty is the only way to punish criminals. So that's the point, right? Because injustice system in this country is worse it could be. What with murderers, rapists, and robbers getting off scot-free. It has got to change. So you change the angle of the argument, and then now you're advocating change in the system, while, well, the main argument here is just about that penalty. Now, the next fallacy is complex question. Now, a complex question is a question that cannot be answered by a simple yes or no. Because if you answer this question, you might accept or deny or acknowledge a hidden question within the question or a hidden assumption within the question. So this is called a loaded question, a question which contains hidden assumption or conditions. So for example, when you're asked, when did you stop lying to your friends? If you answer this question, you may accept the hidden assumption that you've been lying to your friends. So if you answer, I stopped lying to my friends, then that means you've been lying to your friends. If you answer, you did not stop lying to your friends, well, you keep lying to your friends. And so the point here is that it's a question that cannot be answered by a simple yes or no. Or another question, another example. Have you stopped smoking? If you answer that question, yes, I have stopped smoking, that means you've been smoking before, only that you have stopped. If you said no, that means you, you smoke and you still smoke. You have not stopped. So it's a loaded question. Right? Or can I have a share of chocolates you have stolen from the kitchen? If you say yes, well, that means you've been stealing chocolates in the kitchen. Only that this time you want to share. If you answer no, then that means you've been stealing and you don't want to share the chocolates. So that is a question that may lead to some other uh, assumptions. Okay? Or how can we save our country from the bureaucratic dictatorship, the corruption, and the creeping socialism of the present administration? Only one way, vote independent. Well, there is an assumption that there is corruption, there is creeping socialism in the present administration. So if you want to say, let's save our country from this, yes, then that means you're acknowledging something that you don't want to acknowledge because it is an implied condition within the question. Now, next is false dichotomy or false dilemma. Here, it presents as a premise two alternatives, as if they were the only available options or alternatives. But in fact, there are more options or alternatives. So it's a false dichotomy or dilemma because you are given two options, and it's supposed that aside from this option, no other. But if you look closely, there is other options, or there is another option, or there are other options. So it's a false dichotomy or false dilemma. So often the conclusion is only implied and not stated because you are only given the options or the dilemma. So for example, either we elect Mr. X or the economy goes down the drain. The choice should be obvious. It presents only two options. We elect this, and if we don't elect X, our economy will suffer. It's a false dilemma or dichotomy because there is another option. You can actually have another option, a third option, aside from just electing X. Okay, because the options X and the economy are not contradictory. Are not the only option available to you. Or when you say you're either for us or against us, well, you can take the middle option. You can side neither of these two options. You can stay at the middle. You can be the third alternative or the third option. These countries can either sign the resolution endorsing the invasion, or they will be branded as cohorts of this repressive regime. Well, you can you can you can you cannot endorse the invasion, or you may not endorse the invasion, or it does not mean that you will be branded as that you are already a cohort of this repressive regime. So it's a false dichotomy or false dilemma. So here are some examples here. Let's see how we can explain this. A certain jeweler trying to convince his customer to buy his beautiful gem said, the gem is flawless because it is without blemish. Now, obviously, this is begging the question because to be flawless and without blemish are one and the same thing. All departure from law should be punished. Whatever happens by chance is a departure from law. Therefore, whatever happens by chance should be punished. Now, this is an example of fallacy of equivocation because here departure from law by chance, departure from law by chance, these are two different things. We must accept the fact that the U.S. military bases in the Philippines are the largest military bases outside the territory of the United States because top U.S. officials said it is so. This is an example of ad Pericondia because you are mentioning about U.S. officials having said so. Well, there may be some basis for saying this, that they may be experts, but sometimes this may just be self-serving. This may be a subjective assertion of U.S. officials about their military bases. Japan is a rich country. It's a rich and developed country. So every Japanese is rich and developed. This is an example of uh, division because Japan as a country is developed, but it does not follow that when you separate Japan into the different, individual Japanese or citizen of Japan, it does not follow they will be individually, they will be rich. So what is rich and developed is the country, not the citizen of the country. So this is an example of division. Many young people are now attending high schools and colleges, but there is more juvenile delinquency than before. So to eliminate delinquency, we must also eliminate the schools. This is an example of confusing what is uh, accidental and what is essential. Okay, so what is essential is that, well, we educate young people, but if there is a juvenile delinquency because of attending high school, that's just a coincidence. Okay, so it's a fallacy of accident. We can also say that this is also a case of false cause because uh, we cannot establish, or there's very weak connection between attending high schools and juvenile delinquency. So we assume that there is a connection between the two, but in fact, if there is, it's a very insignificant connection, or at least, or at most, no connection at all. If matters little now what the senator says or does, for he has wickedly broken every moral and human rule and obligation to this assembly. He has trampled nature and conscience beneath his feet, and by studying constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty procured for himself a universal hatred. Obviously, this is an attack on the senator. So this is a personal attack on the senator, calling him steady in the constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty. Okay, so this is an abusive type of ad hominem. Accounting subjects need to have much easier exams for students because teachers don't fully realize the extent of the emotional repercussions of the sorrow and depression of the many students who could not score much better on difficult exams. Obviously, when you say the sorrow and depression of many students, it's an obvious appeal for compassion or for pity or mercy. So this is an example of argumentum ad misericordia. A lawyer addressing the jury, I tell you, if you don't convict this murderer, one of you may be his next victim. The lawyer is actually, well, intimidating, no? The members of the jury by saying that they could be, one of them could be his next victim. So it's a case of argumentum ad baculum. Okay, argumentum ad baculum. So another example here. A man who has studied philosophy to its highest degree is a brilliant philosopher. for a brilliant philosopher has studied philosophy to its highest degree. This is the same. So this is an example of what? Begging the question. It's begging the question. Here. How could we trust that idiot to be decisive leader? He is gay. Oh, that's abusive. Okay. That's ad hominem. So it's an attack against the person. Okay. And another example here. We have to stop them from banning manly magazines. Once we start banning one form of literature, they will ban another. They will never stop. Next thing we know, they will be burning all our books. So one thing leads to another, then leads to another, then leads to another without offering any significant proof. So this is an example of a slippery slope. Slippery slope. There's poverty in our society because of many families having many children. So you're trying to connect poverty with families having many children. So you assume that the cause of poverty is the many families having children. And the question there is this the only cause? Is this what causes poverty in our society? Maybe, maybe not. But assuming that this is the cause, this is not the only cause. We have oversimplified the cause here. Okay, oversimplifying the cause. So almost a false cause fallacy. If such actions were illegal, then they would be prohibited by the law. Well, illegal and being prohibited by the law are they are one and the same thing. So this is obviously a case of begging the question. Here, another long example here. We are fully committed to equal rights for women. Women should have every opportunity men have to pursue education and career, to decide whether they wish to marry or not, have children or not. But women should not be permitted to serve in combat. Combat requires maximum upper body strength and aggression, which women simply do not have to the same degree as men. And so they will make less efficient soldiers. This is an insult to women. Okay, so it's an attack on the abilities of women. So this is a clear example of argumentum ad hominem. All right, so that ends this lecture, this presentation on the informal fallacies. So I hope you have learned how to identify the different types of fallacies, and hopefully we will be able to avoid committing any of these fallacies. So thank you very much.